I've heard it often online. Complaints that Games Workshop panders to competitive players, almost always referring to tournament players, the people who are most involved in the hobby, the most vocal. They get the most support from Games Workshop even if they are a tiny minority of players. Or there are complaints I get from the other side when I and Games Workshop have something that doesn't apply to tournaments. There are comments that Games Workshop should have spent the time making more updates to the core rules or one unit interaction or the tournament companion. Those changes do not really matter to more casual players. So I looked into this, fully expecting that the people who rave about tournaments would get the most attention from Games Workshop. I was really surprised by my own findings. Almost everyone is wrong. But there is a balance at play here. Maybe most people went off their gut or weren't thinking about Games Workshop, but about the online discourse. I will come back to that as a point. Any point about which side, casual or competitive play, gets the most support instantly has a counter to the same point, which makes an answer difficult to find, while also making it super easy to organize into a video where I can look at one side and then the other. Here is an example with points for both sides. Sales. And do we talk about cost, or do we agree that casual or competitive Warhammer models and books and cards cost too much? Yes, we do agree that. There are rumours that Games Workshop chases whales. People with so much money to spend that they will buy a whole new army every 6 months if only Games Workshop gives them an incentive. And a little points drop may be all it takes to get people to buy a box. Competitive players are the minority, but in theory they are a minority willing to keep spending. Maybe a competitive player will buy a new army for a new meta, but casual players may not be casual gamers. And they bought 20 kits to have a custom Deathwatch army they always wanted. With a dreadnought with a frag cannon to match the infantry frag cannon. That's cool, right? Shut up! And I traded sprue parts with people because I cannot afford 20 boxes of the Warhammers. I'm just gonna pop that little link on the screen. The link's in the description if you would like to give me some tip money to afford the Warhammers. From talking with ex-Games Workshop employees and store managers, they are told to push the combat patrols and get started boxes to get new players into the game. It doesn't matter if you buy 2 combat patrols to make a tournament army that you spray with your custom airbrush and go on to play 100 games with, or if you buy 2 combat patrols and leave them as a pile of grey sprues in a box. The sale is made. The biggest seller in 10th edition is the Leviathan starter set. Competitive players wouldn't need that, unless they want more Space Marines or Tyranids. The rules are free online, the tournament companion is free online, the mission deck is sold separately, but casual players get everything they need. 2 combat patrols worth of armies, the rules, and all the extras like dice. So I think the sales point is decided for the casual player. At Games Workshop stores, they want to sell starter sets over encouraging army expansion. Get people into the game. Games Workshop knows they don't need to encourage the people who rave about tournaments. They are already in as deep as it gets without much more help from Games Workshop. So at some point, a Games Workshop executive has asked, do we need more hardcore ravers in the UK? I'm going to jump now into the video proper. I haven't got that many visual elements to add to this video, so I'm going to be a vampire in the background while you listen to my voice. The game is called Raven's Watch.
'Tis night when my bite is more bitter than my bark.
We want to define our terms if we're talking casual versus competitive. Casual players will be new players, combat patrol enjoyers, people who play once a month, people who have one army, people who don't go to tournaments, and important distinction, they don't care about tournament rules. Those are not all the same person. Those are lots of different people that are generally considered casual players. If you were to play twice a week in a crusade campaign, you are clearly committed, but will probably be considered casual only because you are playing a really fun 40k format that is not considered competitive. I will stick crusade in casual to show it is in opposition to competitive as a term. Competitive players will know about tournament rules and implement them in everyday games, or they play tournament rules restrictions. They probably play once a week, and if they don't, they are very active in keeping up with the rules and the meta. Tournament players are tryhards. That isn't an insult, but victory is important to them in a competitive game, more so than narrative beats and cool moments. I am not saying that competitive players turn up to a game like their family has been taken and the ransom is one 40k victory, but those people also fit more into the competitive grouping. I am in between them. I mean, in between competitive and casual, not in between a tryhard and their chained up family. I play a lot, easily twice a week. That would suggest I'm in the hardcore competitive player grouping, running a 40k channel about sisters, gene stealer cults, some Death Watch, and 40k rules generally doesn't help. But I love Crusade, I like the one-off rules in White Dwarf, and I bloody love Legends rules. I think most people will be a ratio of one to the other. So where does Games Workshop stand? What do they do for each group? Because in 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000, Games Workshop hasn't well defined their own terms. They refer to narrative play and match play, and sometimes they say casual match play, which implies a competitive match play, which I believe is tournaments. But unlike in 8th edition, there is no definition of terms. We have holdovers in our mind, and so I've had to define the terms myself. I hope we're all okay with those groupings of people under those terms, and I can continue with the ways Games Workshop supports competitive players. The rules of 40k change every 3 months. For casual players, this is far too often to keep up. You get a codex, the points are invalid in 2 weeks. The detachments have an alteration within a month. If you are not keeping up with the game from a competitive, regularly playing standpoint, you fall behind. Why would Games Workshop do such constant updates if casual players were the aim? Because their game has a lot of flaws and major rules issues? Yeah, I guess that would make sense too. But the data used to decide what updates to have is based on tournament data and tournament rulings. Games Workshop doesn't give out a pack with all of the tournament FAQs and rulings. There is a tournament companion to the mission decks, but it doesn't have all of the rulings and FAQs. Each tournament organizer have to make up their own or resolve any issues on the day. There is a rules commentary that gets updated based on how tournaments play it. Either to say, yes, this is how you play it, or no, that's not how we're meant to play it. And there are far more non-Games Workshop tournaments than Games Workshop tournaments. External tournament FAQs will tell Games Workshop what isn't obvious, what they think needs to be included in an FAQ, what needs clarifying, and what players are interpreting differently to how Games Workshop wants them. Games Workshop uses this tournament information to make the general 40k rules commentary and FAQs. Win rates for factions used to be published by Games Workshop on Warhammer Community in MetaWatch until they stopped in early 10th edition, when it only made them look bad. I think the last one was in January 2024, but these showed tournament win rates. And the win rates were by faction, not by detachment. If the Bringers of Flame is 80% of Adeptus Sororitas players and gives the Sisters of Battle a 60% win rate, the faction and the detachment are punished. If Hallowed Martyrs then becomes 80% of the detachment choice of Adeptus Sororitas players, but the win rate for the faction is 48%, that is fine. The Army of Faith or Bringers of Flame and the Penitent Host are not going to receive support. Updates to detachments are rare, particularly the Codex detachments. The Tyranid Crusher Stampede and the Assimilation Swarm have had updates. The Necron Destroyer Cult detachment had a little update, but that is unusual. Balance is mainly determined by unit points and penalties or support for units to make the faction as a whole balanced enough to function at tournaments. If the Dogmata is terrible, it doesn't matter as long as there are alternate characters that Adeptus Sororitas players can take that do a similar job. Core rules updates may come from tournament questions, but the FAQs help all players understand how it was meant to be played regardless of whether they're playing casually or competitively. The points updates keep armies in a sort of balance that will help everyone. Casual players did not like Tzeentch Flamer Madness or Votann Super Lasers in 9th edition any more than competitive players. And currently we aren't waiting 3 years before we have even a small update to your rules. The Votan at the start of 10th edition had a very weak index release, but their rules have been updated to keep the faction competitively viable. Having the time and will to keep up with rules changes is the defining part. Competitive players can keep up and want the changes regularly. In contrast, Combat Patrol rules are not updated. If you look at the Genestealer Cult Combat Patrol rules, the Hand of the Magos Combat Patrol has the army rule as Cult Ambush, as it was at the start of 10th edition. No updates. The Claw of Ascension Combat Patrol uses the version of Cult Ambush from the Genestealer Cult Codex without any of the resurgence points or updates since its release. Boarding actions and Crusade that do not have a continuing competitive scene also receive no updates. There is no FAQ explaining how enhancements work in Crusade, or if a model is returned to the battlefield like the Genestealer Cult Abominant, do they have to roll to see if they receive a scar? They were destroyed during the game. Probably not, but we don't know for sure. Have the issues with army creation of some of the boarding actions been updated? No. That has nothing to do with tournament balance, so it doesn't get updated. There is no need to update the utterly pointless stratagem of Downtrodden Rise in the Genestealer Cult Xenocreed. The faction as a whole is performing just fine. Or is that a point for the casual players? Rules still aren't updated often enough to appease the tournament players. Well, in December 2024, Games Workshop announced that they would return to the rules update style of 9th edition. Lots of rules updates every 3 months instead of their previous 10th edition model of rules changes every 6 months and points changes every 3 months. And there are more rules updates beside that. Emergency balance patches like 2 more DACA. FAQ changes happen without announcements, like the Divine Intervention stratagem of Hallowed Martyrs. There are regular rules changes Games Workshop expects you to keep up with. Games Workshop expect you to be hardcore, or listen to someone who keeps up with the changes. Hello, I'm Christian von Carmian. Games Workshop provides immense internet coverage for major tournaments. The Warhammer YouTube channel live streams games. The events are sponsored and may be part funded by Games Workshop. Games Workshop wants their events run tournament style. When Warhammer the Old World first came out and was run at a big event, with the Legends factions like Dark Elves, Vampire Counts and Skaven, Games Workshop stopped publicizing it. If you are not running a tournament how Games Workshop wants, you don't get a mention. Filthy casuals using all of the Warhammer rules that Games Workshop wrote for Warhammer at a Warhammer event can't be allowed. Announcements and reveals happen at Warhammer events. The Dallas Open, Tampa Bay, they have Games Workshop release live streams run as part of that event. It keeps Warhammer pervasive. Part of making Warhammer 40,000 the most popular wargame is by showing it off as a sport. Video games also make Warhammer feel pervasive, but let's stick to the tabletop. If you play Space Marine 2 but don't play any tabletop 40k, I don't think you would even be considered a casual player, because you don't play. The 40k app is one of the accessible ways to look at rules. If you don't want to carry around a codex and FAQ sheets, the 40k app is a convenient way to travel with the core rules, army rules, detachment and unit rules. Is that to be accessible for casual players? Or is it to make traveling to a tournament easier? Other apps, arguably better ones like New Recruit, are also available. The Games Workshop 40k app for 10th edition of 40k does not include Legends units. In general, Legends units cannot be used at Games Workshop tournaments, and many competitive players will exclude Legends units from their army construction. If it's not in the app, is it even real? Yes, it's real, but you can't see it. The app also defaults to the 2025-2026 mission deck. Like, it will bring up an error at 1000 points if you include a non-battle line unit 3 times over. That is not a rule in other mission decks, in Crusade, or in White Dwarf's bunker missions. This was a rule that was trialed by Games Workshop at their tournaments, like at Nottingham, and then implemented into the mission deck. Once again, tournament rules became everyday rules. For many players, terrain layout defaults become the tournament terrain. This is more a feature of true line of sight rules. Only ruins are written to block line of sight. You can't shoot through one side of a ruin and out the other, but you can shoot through a forest and out the other side. Solid buildings may block line of sight, but they reduce movement as you have to go around them or up and over them. Ruins can be moved through by most units, so ruins are the default, and the way you set up the terrain on the table has only vague rules in the core rulebook. The other end of that is tournament terrain. L-shaped ruins with exact measurements for setting it up on your exactly 44 inches by 60 inches table. So almost all tables will have ruins or use the ruin rules, and the only standardized understandable way to set up terrain is the tournament companion. This sounds like explicit detailed support for tournament players. I think it is also an indictment of the terrain rules, which I have tried to explain and have criticized pretty often. On the average board, the majority of models have cover at any given time. Only ruins, or a square of card with a short wall representing a ruin, will sufficiently block line of sight, so ruin rules are used. Games Workshop knows that only the ruins function, and all terrain types from the core rules are disregarded in favor of ruins of the L-shaped variety. Maybe competitive players have more support, but they have to have it? Like a child with extra needs, they should get more support. A standard international tournament way of playing, so whatever Games Workshop event you're at, the rules are the same, down to the inches between terrain. 40k will be played to the extreme the rules allow at tournaments. If unkind things are allowed, they are allowed. In a more casual setting, you are told, hey, acquaintance that I'm not yet willing to call a friend, we don't do that here. So don't do that here. Maybe casual players are left to just arrange it by themselves. They can arrange their own terrain, they can arrange their own game nights. But how does Games Workshop support these casual players who want to have friends over and play their games, but aren't using preset tournament companion rules or L-shaped ruins? They have far more than the core rules. When we think about support for casual players, let's first think about terrain. In the core rules, there are loads of kinds of terrain, for woods, buildings, statues, pipes, barricades, hills, and more. L-shaped ruins are about the only terrain that works with the current rule set. They're a symptom of the problem rather than the problem itself. The terrain rules of 10th edition are some of the worst you can have in a wargame. Only ruins properly block line of sight and allow free movement. But Games Workshop does not expect you to buy L-shaped ruins from them, and only play with L-shaped ruins. They have accepted other kinds of terrain and provided rules, bad rules, to cater for them. In the Tournament Companion, it encourages people with good terrain collections to use more than ruins, as long as they have line of sight blocking terrain to stop the side with all the guns from winning. I mean, winning instantly. L-shaped ruins are not the requirement. Tell everyone! Games Workshop sells pipes, they sell solid buildings, they sell trees and craters, statues, aerials, towers and walls. The only L-shaped ruins were in the Octaria set, a kill team game. Games Workshop does not sell the terrain set for tournaments as a bundle. You have to piece it together yourself or use a third-party seller. If Games Workshop was catering for people to use the Games Workshop tournament terrain layout, wouldn't they sell that in a box? That seems like money being missed out on. But they sell so many sets of rules. There are more Crusade mission books than mission decks. I think everyone's in agreement that Crusade is not a competitive format. There was a Leviathan mission deck and a Leviathan Crusade book, a Pariah Nexus mission deck and a Pariah Nexus Crusade book, a Nakmud Gauntlet Crusade book, the 2025-2026 mission deck, and the Armageddon Crusade book. I've done a review of the rules in that Crusade book. There were also rules provided in White Dwarf 502 to use the Pariah Nexus mission deck in Crusade games with experience points for units that complete secondary missions. Even if you think of the match play decks as competitive, there are rules to adapt them for casual play. You don't get rules to adapt Crusade into matched play. 9th edition had 6 Crusade books and more stuff in the White Dwarf. That's Games Workshop's monthly magazine, so there may be the same this edition. But from the naming of the 2025 to 2026 mission deck, expect that to be the last one. There is far more casual content produced than matched play content. The core rules could be argued to be for casual or competitive players. They are used by both, they are the core rules. They're a simple-ish base. One argument is that the rules don't have any "oops, my Chaos Sorcerer turned into a wibbly spawn" as they had in previous editions. But if you want to accidentally do a line of demons, the Crusade book Armageddon has you covered. The casual side is there. The Tournament Companion is not necessary to use the mission decks. It is easier to use the 2025 to 2026 mission deck in casual games than it is for competitive tournament-style games. The deck comes with impactful twist cards and asymmetric games, deployment layouts, and mission rules that are not for tournaments, but they are part of the chapter-approved match play mission deck for everyday casual players and then sort of for your competitive tournament players. What makes it feel more tournament-like is the online mindset. The 2025-2026 mission cards were leaked. This is not a surprise. But the leakers did not include asymmetric cards, incursion maps, asymmetrical maps, and only included twists later on. When a codex is initially leaked, the detachment and unit stats are leaked, the lore and the Crusade parts are not. That isn't Games Workshop. Games Workshop put the Crusade rules in the codex as a fundamental part of playing the codex. They put asymmetric missions in the mission deck as part of the way they're meant to be played. And then the Tournament Companion is the optional part that removes the cards. Tournament style isn't their main way, it is an optional supplement. You could argue that the mission deck is for competitive players, but the asymmetric nature of it propels a narrative of attacker who is attacking and the defender who gets victory points for defending, instead of the green-red player symmetrical delineation. That makes this match play deck far more casual. It can be made competitive, but it isn't by default. If you say the 2025 to 2026 match play mission deck is for the competitive players, not the casual players, because of this add-on, then the Pariah Nexus mission deck is for casual players because there's an add-on to make it viable in Crusade. There are so many terms that people think of as standard 40k rules that are only used within the high competitive tournament bros online circle. And it is these people constantly talking about the 40k game that pervade the idea that 40k is a highly competitive game. In fact, it is a small number of vocal players wanting it to be highly competitive. On YouTube, if you want an audience that comes back week after week, you cater to competitive players. They will be there. They will want more information on 40k. Casual players may turn up for the occasional video, but the majority isn't here for every video. Hello to my precious minority. There is a Discord linked in the description if you would like to join. And if you find yourself continually coming back to this channel often, you may as well click the subscribe button. Rules like the consistent and enforced base sizes for models is not a 40k rule you find anywhere except in the tournament rules, and each tournament has different rulings. The rule may be different in Games Workshop tournament events taking place on the same day. Some say use the base the model came on, regardless of age. Some say it must be the current Games Workshop sold base size. Some say you can go bigger than currently sold, but not smaller. Within Games Workshop there is a debate about tanks. Is it okay or not okay to put a tank on a base? That is a fight that happens within the White Dwarf team apparently. Much null oil will be spilled. And the Games Workshop tournament base size guide is there, but not as a rule for all, but explicitly as support for tournament organizers and not intended for all games of 40k. Or have I done it again and given a point for the other side in the section that's meant to be about this side? Maybe. But let's talk about publications. The Warhammer community updates like every day, and it is mostly advertising, yes. They show off painting, conversions, occasional mention of events, but there hasn't been a meta watch for over a year. Games Workshop no longer breaks down win rates at tournaments or covers where and why balance changes have had an effect. Maybe this is because of bad feeling. Here is an article that shows the Eldar winning 2/3 of their games when Games Workshop aims for a 55% win rate at max. That's not ideal. But the Grand Narrative event in September gets the most coverage in costumes and battles and scenario rules. In White Dwarf, there is a battle tips section written by Stephen Box, who has a YouTube tactics channel, but the scenarios and the battle reports are almost all story driven. The bunker missions that are given out in each White Dwarf are not for tournament players. They offer a very different tactical challenge, but they're not what most people consider competitive. Combat Patrol gets updates with more combat patrols. That is not what people think of as a competitive game mode. Rules that are competitive play compatible, like fighting a battle under Khorne or Nurgle influence, are also narrative play compatible, and competitive players often turn their nose up at the idea. Games Workshop has all of these rules for the everyday player, not the tournament players, and this magazine comes out monthly. That can mean 3 sets of rules before the tournament companion gets a look over to receive 1 FAQ. December 2024 was the last tournament update, aside from the new one with the new mission deck with the last balance patch. That means there's been 6 months with no competitive tournament update. Isn't a lack of updates an aspect we think of with Legends? Legends units are models no longer sold by Games Workshop. They have rules in 40k, but to keep a level playing field, Games Workshop tournaments often exclude Legends units, and yet they have created rules to use these models. That would suggest they support casual players with older collections who aren't constantly buying the newest thing. The rules were not written to not be used. You write rules so people use the rules. Wait, or because there is a separate classification for Legends as the unusual, does that mean that Games Workshop sees competitive tournaments as the main players and anyone using Legends as the side players? Well, Legends rules are certainly support for older models. Models that can't be used at most tournaments. Legends rules are not actively balanced, but we have seen units updated as they enter Legends, like the Adeptus Sororitas Crusaders who got a full rework. That is not something you do if you're not supporting a format. We have also seen models leave Legends and enter a codex, like the Imperial Agents Navigator and the Chaos Cult Firebrand. The wording around Legends across the game systems has become much better for Games Workshop games releases since 10th edition of 40k started. They included Age of Sigmar Legends units on their Age of Sigmar app, making these rules more accessible to the casual player who isn't going to check the downloads page of the Warhammer community website. The 40k app does not include Legends units, and it follows the 2025-2026 mission deck rules with no way to change it. There is no Crusade rules reference. Even for codices you bought and input the code into the app, there is nothing. But there are Combat Patrol rules for all of the boxes available in 10th edition and the extra combat patrols from the White Dwarf magazine, like the Harlequin Twilight Cavalcade. The 40k app was made before the Age of Sigmar app, which puts the trend in favour of Legends getting included in the 11th edition 40k app. And there is another data point with the updated Lord of the Rings Middle-earth strategy battle game. The Lord of the Rings had some legacy rules for no longer sold models, and it makes it clear that you can use these rules in tournaments where Games Workshop isn't looking. They are all the time rules. But we know that most competitive players are gonna pass on them, which is silly, but that is the mental zeitgeist. The ruling says, whilst the profiles and army lists found within these PDFs will not be legal for any official Games Workshop events or events officially supported by Games Workshop, event organisers are still more than welcome to use them in their own events should they wish. If they do so, it should be made clear to all attendees so that everyone knows that the Legacies of Middle-earth document are in use. Perhaps the timestamp length of the sections will show which side of casual or competitive 40k is most catered to, but you know the answer. It's both. Games Workshop won't give up on the chance to get money. The only people who were right were the people who commented that both is the correct answer. I didn't know the answer before I looked into it, so this wasn't a trick. I should talk more about tournaments. Maybe in a collab. Okay, let me see. YouTube channels that talk about casual 40k. Okay, there are hundreds. Casual 40k player at tournaments? That hasn't really narrowed it down. Stupid tournament meme list. Oh, forget it. I'll just go get Paul. We are gonna go to the most toxic tournaments we can find near to us. You can expect that video soon, if it's not already on the side here. Legends rules are worth talking about. It's worth knowing why Legends rules exist and how good it is that they do. So that video is an option for you. My darlings and viewers, casual or competitive, have a great day of 40k.